Okay, Boker Tov and Shavua Tov, and welcome to the new season of our Sunday Shiur. It's a great pleasure to see you here, and it's a great pleasure to be here. Which it is nice also in the army, but it's much better here. It is much better here, so I'm very happy and excited. Also, as we advance with our series from the 19th century, which of course we could have spoke about another 2 or 3 years easily. But as we have to advance, time is advancing, so we also have to advance. And Be'ezrat Hashem, I hope this winter to speak about the 20th century. I also want to thank everyone that is responsible in organizing and helping and setting and cleaning afterwards. All of these people are voluntarily doing. And I really want to thank everyone that is a part of that. Also, I want to mention that our series is dedicated to Ilui Nishmat Rafael Moshe Ben Eliyahu, which we are laying for is Neshama. And we are moving, as I said, into the 20th century. When I speak about the 20th century, I want to focus on what was used to be called the short 20th century. So they spoke about there is the long 19th century because it ends with the First World War, which is being seen as part of the 19th century in a sense. And then the new world, which begins after, in the day the canons stop. So that is when the new modern era. Everything is modern. When it's modern, then it's old. But the modern world begins with the end. The modern political world begins with the end of the First World War. And it was used to be said that that's the short century because it begins with the end of First World War and it ends with the fall of the communist regime. So that was the way that many historians were dividing the eras. However, some historians nowadays they lengthen the 20th century till 9/11. So they say maybe we should end the 20th century, the era, the historical time by 9/11. It's less, I think, for us, it's maybe of less importance. However, that is what I want to focus our attention this winter. We spoke about the First World War because many of the great rabbis, the leaders of the Jewish people during the First World War were the leaders that also led the people in the second half of the 19th century. While when we come to the Second World War, obviously there were some people that survived, as we can understand, but nonetheless, it's a new time, it's a new era. And obviously when we speak about the 20th century, for the Jewish people, there are two main events that each one of them completely and ultimately reshaped and reversely reshaped the Jewish landscape, very different from each other. One, of course, is the Shoah, the Holocaust, during the Second World War, and the other is the establishment of Medinat Israel. And you cannot say anything about Jewish history and as a consequence about the Jewish rabbis that were active in these years without speaking about their reacts or involvements or the way that they were active maybe in these two extremely main events. And that's an extremely short introductory to the 20th century. However, I assume that we do not have to speak too much about the concrete details of the 20th century because in the end, all of us are not necessarily in living memory of all of these events, but we at least have a very good, I think, grasp of and knowledge of the details of the history in 20th century. I was very hesitant regarding who to introduce in our first meeting about the 20th century. And I chose someone who is, I think, very unique, out of the way of our regular square-shaped rabbis. which we usually, of course, no rabbi was made in a cookie cutter, no person was made in a cookie cutter. And people are different from each other, and rabbis are different from each other. But nonetheless, you have this, many times you have this out of the mill type of a rabbi, and he learned by so-and-so, and he did so-and-so, and he led, and he taught, and there is his Torah, and he was a Gaon, and everything works less or great, and that's his story. The rabbi that we would speak today I don't think that he would claim that he was a great rabbi. And not necessarily that we have too much Torah that survived from him. His story is also not necessarily a story, at least most of his story, is not a story of success. Nonetheless, I think it's an extremely inspiring story. And I think it's a story that represents the challenges, the difficulties of the Jewish people, and more specifically of the Jewish leadership during the 20th century, and also the unwavering hope and redemption of this century. And that's why I chose to speak about Rav Yechezkel Taub, which I would assume that most of those sitting here around the table never heard the name. So, Rav Yechezkel Taub was born in 1895. So he's a child of the new century, right? 1895. And he was born in Poland. His father is Rav Yaakov Taub, the Yabloner Rebbe. The Rebbe from Yablona. He is a Zion descendant to a very important Hasidic dynasty that began with Rabbi Yechezkel Taub. He is the name bearer of Rav Yechezkel Taub, the Magid of Makuzmir. And the Chasidut, they are relatives to the Mojits. I think people are aware or familiar with Mojits Chasidut. So they are relatives of them. And the Chasidut of Yablona in Poland is a mid-range, we may say, Chasidut. It's not one of the greatest. It's not like Satma or I don't know, Vizhnitz or Ger, but it's a mid-range Chasidut. It's about 1,000 families, which is 1,000 families and a well-to-do Hasidut. Yablona is a city not far from Warsaw, and it's like a resort city, and the Jews living there are, you have your shoemaker and you have also, obviously your gvir, but it's, in general, you may say it's a wealthy Hasidut. Now, he's the only son, meaning the only boy. His father also have 4 girls, and the father was also a rabbi, didn't intend him to be his successor. Very interestingly, he named his son-in-law as his successor. That is not regular in Hasidut. Usually it would be the son that would replace the father. But there is one advantage in a son-in-law on a son. The son-in-law is someone you chose. I mean, not necessarily in our culture, but in their culture, the son-in-law is someone you chose. And so his father wanted to appoint our hero brother-in-law as the next Rebbe. However, this brother-in-law got sick and died in a very young age. And then Rav Yaakov Taub, his father, the father of our hero, decided that Rav Yechezkel, our hero, would replace him when time comes. We know from a much later time, Rav Yechezkel would say that when he was very young, he had a private tutor, because the schools back in Yablona were not necessarily the best schools there were. So his father wanted to give him private, Jewish, obviously, education. However, his melamed, his teacher, was also what we would call today a maskil. Now, a maskil not necessarily means, as we may have in mind, that he keeps no mitzvot, he's epikores. There were plenty of nice religious Jews keeping Torah and mitzvot observant, but that also had some openness to external literature or science. And it seems that his teacher was one of these. There were many of them. Many of them were also private teachers for ideological reasons and for financial reasons. So he's being taught, and it seems that maybe not necessarily his father knew it, that his private teacher also introduced him to Russian literature, to Germanic literature, all of them, by the way, translated to Hebrew, because that is what the young boy, he knows Yiddish, and he knows Hebrew. He doesn't know Polish, he doesn't know Russian, that's what he knows. So he's reading translated literature, which, as I said, many, many years later, he would say that that's deeply affected him and maybe in some ways also influenced his life. Be it as it may, as I said, in the as maybe the circumstances forced his father, he chose him to replace him. Now, they did think that they have some time to train him as the future Rebbe. He was married in 1915 at the age of 20 to a certain Pearl, which also came from the Kuzhnitz dynasty of Hasidut. So all of these, those of you that are interested in the genealogy of Hasidim, so know that these dynasties, all of them are very oftenly, they marry each other. And I am very far from being an expert. I mean, there are people, I hear them sometimes, their lectures, or I read, and there are people that they have better of a handle on these Hasidic families than I have on my own family, of who married whom in the third degree. So, but fine, Baruch Hashem, so they married him in the age of 20, and then just 5 short years later, Rav Yaakov Taub passes away in a young age, and Rav Yexhezkel Taub, our hero, finds himself as the Rebbe of Yabloner at the age of 24. At the age of 24, which is, as you can imagine, very young. Now, he is known as a very warm personality. He's creating personal connections with his Hasidim. He's caring for each other. His dishes in Leil Shabbat, in Shabbat night, were famous for the songs, also for the Torah, but I would be honest, it's very, very difficult to find the Torah. Maybe the Torah was good, but no one cared to preserve it. But people did speak and give testimonies about the singing, about how he was warm with everyone. He knew we speak about 1,000 families, or at least 1,000 male Hasidim, let's say, that he spoke with, and he knew each one by name and knew to relate to his condition. However, he was not happy, not content with the situation. He felt that as a Hasidic Rebbe, he is being asked to give brachot, he is being asked to give guidance, but people are not really interested in spirituality. They don't ask him if he feels the right questions. I would relate to it from I'm not a Hasidic Rebbe, if someone have missed it up till now. But however, sometimes you ask yourself, people come to ask questions before Yom Kippur, let's say, or before Tisha B'Av. So they would ask you, can they wash their mouth? Can they wash their teeth? Can they do X or Y? It's maybe on every 20 questions of technicalities, maybe you'd get one question each. Someone would say, what would you recommend for me learning before Tisha B'Av or before Yom Kippur? And that gives you some of the problem of balance. And I guess that, again, in the Hasidic world, I am trying to have some empathy to what he was feeling. So he felt the same thing. People came to him with different questions and requests for bracha, but no one was interested, or not, at least not enough, or he felt not enough, in what he was there in order to teach and to spiritually guide. And then in 1924, 4 years after he became the Rebbe of Yabloner, comes in Rav Yeshaya Shapira. Rav Yeshaya Shapira, I don't know if you are familiar with the name, is sometimes called the Admor HaChalutz, the pioneer Rebbe. Maybe you are more familiar with his brother. His brother is Rav Kalmonimus Shapira, who is known as the Piacenza Rebbe, the Yesh Kodesh and the Chovat HaTalmidim. So this is his brother. His brother made Aliyah, and he was trying to convince Hasidim, not Litvaks, which is a completely different story, but Hasidim to make Aliyah to Eretz Israel, and not just to make Aliyah in order to live in Yerushalayim, but to make Aliyah in order to begin to cultivate the land and be a part of the Jewish state project. We are speaking about 1920. So it's after the Balfour Declaration. So that is something that is up in, not in the air, something that is going on, that is happening. And he wants as many Chassiduyot to make Aliyah and to make the land into a really Jewish land, a Jewish state, not only by name, but also by appearance, by look, and by act. And he is making a tour through Europe, and he gives drashot in different communities, trying to encourage the people to make Aliyah, and to make Aliyah en masse, in large, as a community. He is not extremely successful. However, when he comes to Yabloner and he speaks to the Rebbe feels that here comes his opportunity to make a difference. He is completely overcome with this feeling that here is the Balfour, that's what Rav Yeshua Shapira is speaking about. The Balfour Declaration is like the Koresh Declaration. The Jews are now given the permission to come back and to restore their old homeland. It's a Geulah from heaven, and we must go. What are we doing in Poland? Which is a good question. Right? It's a good question. And he says, make Aliyah as a community. And the Rebbe of Yabloner, who is looking for something, he feels, as I said, he feels there is a hole, there is a gap, there is not enough spiritual growth in where his people reside now. He says, this is our opportunity to move forward, to move upward in Kedusha to Eretz Israel. And he sells it to his community, and they buy it, which again is very rare. And he says, it's one of his remarks that have survived. So the Rabbi Yahzkel Taub says, it is better to be a simple worker in Eretz Israel than to be a Rebbe in the Gola. You can maybe hear also that he is unhappy, as I said, with his role as a Rebbe. So in a sense, he says to his Hasidim in such a remark, he says, even if you would not follow me, it is better for me to become a simple worker in Eretz Israel than to be a Rebbe if you want to stay in Galut. And as I said, the people are following him, and he has a plan. He is a man of vision, as you will see. He has a plan. His plan is he has about 1,000 families, and they are well-to-do. Many of them are well-to-do. So he says, the richest and the wealthiest, those that have a good, steady income, would stay in Poland. I will take with me all the people that are less well-to-do, because they don't make any money here anyway. I would go with them to Eretz Israel. I would be supported by the rich that would remain in Poland and continue to make good money. And they would support us. I would buy land. We would establish Ishuv, an agricultural Ishuv. And then when everything would be ready, we'd build the homes for everyone, everyone else would follow suit. That was the idea. And he began to collect money, obviously from his own Hasidim, but that is not enough because they have to buy land. So he's beginning to make tours also throughout Europe in the Hasidic communities that he was close to in order to collect money. In his tour, he meets with the Imrei Emet. The Imrei Emet is the Rebbe of Ger of the time. And he meets with the Imrei Emet. And the Imrei Emet, he wants the Imrei Emet to approve his plan, because if you have an approval from someone in the stature of the Imrei Emet, you're in a completely different ball game than if you are, with all due respect, the Rebbe of Yabloner. So he is coming to Gur, and he is asking, give me an approval. And the Imrei Emet says to him, are you going to connect with the Tzionim, with the secular? And the Rebbe of Yavloner says, you know, if I'm going to Eretz Israel, I need to work with them. They would help me buy the land. That's the people you have to work with when you go to Eretz Israel. So the Imrei Emet says to him, then I cannot give you my approval. You have to decide. Either you are with us or you are with them. So we have testimonies about this meeting. The Rebbe of Yabloner did not remain silent. Rebbe of Yabloner asked, why did you let your own follower, Reb Yitzchak Gershten Cohen? If you were Bnei Brakim, as I am, as I've been, then you would have known the name. He is the man that established Bnei Brak, Gershon Cohen. To this day, it's a very important family in Bnei Brak. And why did you let him he's working with the Aguda and with the Tzionim, and everything is fine, so why is he allowed to? And the Ger Rebbe said to him, because I know him, and he would not blunder the borders. He knows who is who. I don't have the same confidence in you. And the Yabloner Rebbe, according to what we have, the witnesses, the Rebbe of Yabloner refused to say that he would not accept money or help from the Tzion. The Gur Rebbe said, if you have to know, if they would help you, it would not be for your own sake, it would be for their sake. And the Yabloner Rebbe said, I would accept money or help because I need them. However, I would not connect to them in a way that would compromise our standards of religiosity and faith. It was not enough for the Imre Emet, and the Rebbe of Yabloner left without an approval. We have a letter that the Imre Emet wrote a few weeks later, in which he writes something to the effect of, the man named the Rebbe of Yabloner was here a few weeks ago, and he promised me that he would not connect with the Chofshiim. The Chofshiim means the friar, I think that's the Yiddish word that they were using, with the seculars. However, I would have hoped that I would be able to believe him. The story is very complicated. Don't be rushed to judge any of them, because both of them were very much right and completely wrong, as life are. The Rebbe of Yabloner does not step back. He continues his plan with or without the approval of the Imre Emet. He collects the money, and in the end, in 1925, he makes Aliyah with 100 families of his Hasidim. So 900 families remains behind in Poland, and 100 families, including himself, are coming to Eretz Israel, and they buy the lands near Haifa that are known today as Kfar Hasidim. But it was much more. He collected a lot of money, especially from his own Hasidim. And he was able to buy a very large amount of land. However, there were problems. In the beginning, everything was shining. Many people were very happy with a group of Hasidim coming in and buying land and beginning to cultivate the land. Because the JNF, the Keren Kayemet LiYisrael, saw that as a big precedent that now we can publish. They printed a whole pamphlet about the Yabloner Hasidim coming to Eretz Israel with many pictures of the Yabloner Rebbe working in the fields. And here you see all of the Hasidim can come, and obviously they can send their money. They really hope that they would be able to make a change, a difference in the position of the Hasidim in Eastern Europe, because as we all know, we speak about millions of people. Had they come in the 20s, it was pretty easy to come to Eretz Israel. It's before the White Book, it's before everything, before all these laws that stopped Jewish immigration, Aliyah to Eretz Israel. So it was pretty easy. It was not easy financially, but they wouldn't stop you on your way. So they really hoped that maybe millions, hundreds of thousands would come. And he was visited it was not called Kfar Hasidim, he called it Nachalat Ya'akov after his father. It was only later called Kfar Hasidim, but he called it Nachalat Ya'akov. So he was visited by Rav Kook, by Rav Meir, was the chief rabbinic, Sephardic rabbi of the time. He was visited by Achad Ha'am. He was visited by Chaim Weizmann. He was visited by Chaim Nachman Bialik. All of these wanted to be part of this new thing, Hasidim coming and becoming people of land, work in Eretz Israel. Beautiful. There were some people that opposed. One man called David Ben Gurion, gave a whole address in one of the congresses in which he bemoaned why is land being given to Hasidic people coming from Europe, and it's a waste of land. They don't know how to cultivate it. Instead, if they come to Eretz Israel, we should send them to the cities and send our pioneers, our chalutzim that are being trained in Europe. They should get the land. That's just a very short introduction into the politics of the 20s, 30s, and much later of Palestine and later of Medinat Israel. Now, I think it's very easy to say that Ben-Gurion was motivated not only by the question of wasting of the land, but also because he wanted his pioneers, meaning the seculars, to remain and to retain control in Eretz Israel. For good reasons. He thought that's the future. However, he also had a valid point. The Yabloner Rebbe came to Eretz Israel. He bought land, he had money, but they had no farming experience or training. They decided they would establish dairy farms for milk. It completely failed. So financially, they were in troubles. Also, the way you bought land back then in Eretz Israel, the land didn't belong to the Arabs, the falachim, the simple workers that were working it. It belonged to Affendis. These were the lords of the land. 90% of them, maybe more, didn't live in Eretz Israel. Eretz Israel was a backwater place. They lived in Beirut. They lived in Syria, in good places. So the specific landlord, the Affendi, they bought the land from, lived in Beirut. And they bought the land, and they told all the Arab workers, tenants, that's it, you are out of here. But they didn't want to leave. This landlord maybe have never visited him, and his father never visited the land. They were sitting on the land for I don't know how many generations. So they refused to leave. When they did leave, they were constantly on the borders of the issue, of the settlement, and they were throwing dead bodies of animals into the wells in order to poison the water. They were burning the fields. Also, the settlers suffered from invasions of Bedouins, which murdered some of the settlers. After 2 years, there was a gate. It was a healthy winter, but with a lot of rain. The Kishon overflowed and created a swamp. The settlers were not equipped to deal with it, and began malaria, and some died. So it was very, very difficult, and he was not able to financially sustain himself. There also began a financial turbulence in Poland, so some of the inflow of money was reduced, and he had to go to the JNF and ask for money. And here you can begin to hear the echoes of what the Imre Emet told him. Because the JNF, which was so happy and printed pamphlets with his name, they didn't pay him for printing all of these ads back then. But now he comes to them for help. So they told him, or it was his suggestion, we may be able to help you, but it would cost us a lot of money. We also don't have too much money. So if you want us to help you, give us some of your lands. Share the land. You bought a very huge plot of land. Share with us some of it. The Yabloner Rebbe in the beginning didn't want to do so, because, as you remember, it was not really his. He bought it with the money of his Hasidim, who were waiting to come and live in the homes that he would build on these lands. He tried to do a journey to the United States in order to collect money there. And he is going in 1928. He goes to the United States. But those of you that have familiarity with the history of the United States knows that maybe it was the worst year to come and collect money in 1928, because in few months there would be the Great Depression. He stayed in the United States. It seems there is some inconsistency in the different accounts that I read here, but it seems that he stayed. He himself says, again in an interview that was made with him in 1977, so many years later, he says that he stayed in the United States for 7 years. from 1928 to 1935, trying to collect money, all the time exchanging letters with the JNF, trying to create some program for no avail. In 1935, he returns to Eretz Israel and signs a contract with the JNF in which he allows them, he gives over most of the land that he bought in exchange for them helping his Hasidim not to starve to death in Kfar Hasidim. Also, in Kfar Hasidim, during this time, people come in. One of them is a certain Mordechai Yonai. Now, he is a man that was raised in Poland as a religious Jew. However, he is not religious anymore. I would say that in a very understatement. When he comes to Kfar Hasidim, he is helping them building for the animals, the refatot, the stable, but for cows, the barns. So you have them build the barns, and so he's a worker basically. But he is giving, in the afternoons, he gives lectures about his faith. And some of the youngest begin to drift after him. So people come to the Yabloner Rebbe and tell you have to remove him because he is a bad influence. But the Yabloner Rebbe says, no, my Kabbalah is, what I'm accepted is that because of baseless hatred, the Jewish homeland was destroyed, so we must build it with free love. So we love everyone in Eretz Israel. We do not remove anyone from our midst, which is noble on the one hand, but you can understand the difficulty on the other, and you can begin again to understand why the Ger Rebbe had difficulty with our hero, with Rabbi Yahzkel Tao. In a year, this Mordechai Yonai married the niece of Rabbi Yahzkel Tao, named Ariela. She was not named Ariela when she was born in Poland, as you can guess. She was named Mir. But when she came to Eretz Israel, they Hebraized her name into Ariela. So she marries him. He would become important as the story would continue. So in 1935, as I said, he's signing this, maybe 2 years later. As I said, there is some inconsistency about when did he return and when did he sign the contract. Be it as it may, one thing is clear. He lost most of the land that he bought. And then in 1936, the great Arab revolt, uprising, is happening in Eretz Israel. Also, his settlement near Haifa is under attack. The roads are becoming closed. And some of his Hasidim says to him, we want out. Give us our money and I'll give you back our land. And he has to tell them, I have no money. I'm completely bankrupt. And if this is not enough, something which maybe you can see as good happening, some of the Hasidim in Poland wants now to come to Eretz Israel because it's 1936. Everyone in Europe that has some sense begin to feel that the ground, there is fire. And so it's good because they are coming. There is no land to give to them. He gave out all the land. He hoped that you'd have time to regain his standing. But it's 1936 and 37. There is no time. And they say, where is our land? He says, I sold it. Who gave you permission to sell it? It was not yours. You are a ganav. You are a thief. This is his former, maybe, Hasidim. They shout at him at the street. He cannot live anymore. He cannot give drashot anymore. And then he decides he has a very bad timing. In 1398, in December of 1398, he decides that he would go to a second round in the United States for trying to schnorr money. Now, last time it was the Great Depression. You all understand what would catch him now. As I said, I think his story is the story of the Jewish history of the 20th century. So he's coming to the United States, and he begins to make some inroads and to make some good money. But then in September of 1939, as you all know, Second World War breaks. And he decides, again, he was not as successful as maybe he had wanted to. And then he decides that he wants to join the American army against the Nazis, which is a noble cause. However, the American army didn't have much to do with a man in his 40s which has Hasidic training. Yes. It's extremely good question. It's very good that you're asking me. So he had a wife, he had no children. His wife made Aliyah with him in 1924 when he made the Aliyah. However, as part of the agreement with the JNF, he had to make a, like, I would call it selection. It's a bad name, but it is what it was. And everyone that was not fit to good work was just a strain on the community resources. So many people were sent back to Poland. He tried to prevent it. It would say for his merit. He tried to fight against them, but in the end, all the cards were in their hands. And he had to capitulate. So many were sent. I have no, and there is no info, I think it's too personal. What is clear is that his wife returned to Poland, where they separated, where he had to just to send her in order to help those that went back. It is very difficult for me to know. I think they didn't want to part. I mean, it's not part. In all of the accounts that I read, there are 2 or 3 of them, this part is completely missing. So something happened there. His wife went back to Poland and he had no children. That's what we know for sure. So he's coming back to the United States. He tried to enlist to the army. They refuse him. They don't want him in the Navy fighting or in Europe fighting. However, they suggest that he would go to the shipyards and become a worker. And maybe he had this dream of becoming a simple worker, right? Because this is a recurring theme. And he's taking that. In the beginning, he's still coming with his Hasidic grab, and there are even some newspapers that publish how a Hasidic Rebbe is coming to help the United States Army, and that he is compensating for not working on Shabbatot. He's working over hours on the weekdays. Very nice. However, as time goes on, the news about the extermination of Poland Jewry is coming in. At a certain point, is being told that the Yabloner community is no longer. They were more or less erased, including his wife, including all of his relatives, including all of the Hasidim that stayed behind, including the people that he agreed that would be sent back to Poland. And there his world collapsed. He feels that he is a Rebbe without Hasidim. His Polish Hasidim were destroyed. The people in Eretz Israel doesn't want to see him. They think that he's a ganav. He's a fraud. Can there be a Rebbe without Hasidim? So he's not a Rebbe anymore. And not only that, it seems that he couldn't hold that. Couldn't hold what happened to his family, what happened to his Hasidim, everything that happened to his life when he tried so much to help and to advance his Hasidim and his people and his nation and his land. And he leaves everything behind. He abandons. He takes off the hat, he takes off the yarmulke, he takes off the peros, he takes off the beard. He completely severs himself from any connection with Hasidim. He just disappeared one day in the middle of the World War. He feels naturalization, I think it's called, documents with the United States government, and he changes his name when he gets the Ezrachut, right, the citizenship. He changes his name to George Nagel. He is not Yahzekal Taub, but Yahzekal Taub is dead. He is George Nagel. The only one he keeps contact with is, you remember this Mordechai Yonai that was married to his niece. So they still live in Kfar Hasidim. He sent letters to them, not very frequently. And in order not to be identified, because the letters come to the postal office, so on the envelope he writes Uncle Dod, which is, Dod is uncle in Hebrew. And that's the way that the letters come. No one knows that it's from him. And only she and Mordechai Yonai and his niece, and the Rav Taub Snips, only them know that he is George Nagel in the United States. And he abandons everything. I don't think that we need to go into details about what mitzvot he's keeping, not. I don't think it's part of our discussion here. After the war ends, he decides to become a land contractor, a construction. because that's what he is, in the end, that's what he was trained in Eretz Israel. And he begins to work as a constructor in LA. What he does basically is to buy plots of lands and he subdivides them and builds homes and then sell them in a way that he earns money from the selling. And he's doing very good money. It's very good years in the United States in the Western shore, because the United States was interested in people and money flowing in, so they allowed for the he himself expanded in some interviews, so that's how I know that. So they allowed for the interest that the banks gave for money coming in the Western shore. They let it to be much higher than in the Eastern shore. So money was always flowing from the East to the West, and money was easy to get. So if money is easy to get, then the business are good. So he was doing very good money. For 30 years, more or less, from 45, from the end of the war, to about 72 or 73, no one hears from him. We know now that there were some families that he was Jewish. I mean, in the end, he was Polish, he spoke Yiddish, whose friends would he have? So he had some friends, Jewish friends, one Reform, one secular, one Orthodox. They was friends. We would eat Shabbatot with, not because of religious reasons, just for social reasons. And they didn't know who he was. For them, he was just another lost Polish soul. Someone that somehow escaped the Shoah and is now rolling and wandering about. There were many of these. Alone, without wife, without children, without anything. And we have a beautiful story about him being in. So one of the people he was close with was Orthodox, and he always was trying to bring him to Bet Knesset, to bring him to teach him, just, because he saw a Hasidic Jew, so maybe he would try to rekindle his neshama. And he didn't want, but, he was a friend of him. He didn't want to insult him. So every blue moon, you have to agree. So once they went to a tish, there was some Hasidic rabbi that came to LA and gave a tish, and they sat in the tish, and there was someone sitting next to them, a couple sitting next to them, and not two men, obviously, it's only male. And one says to the other, with George Nagel hearing, he says, "You call that a tish? I, as a kid, was taken to the tish of the Yabloner Rebbe. That was a tish." And he sits there and he says nothing. So for, as I said, about 30 years, he is a successful constructor in California. However, in the beginning of the 70s, the economics are changing. The laws that I spoke about earlier of the investments are changing. And also, it seems that he's becoming old. He's already 70. He's not on top of his game anymore. And he's becoming, again, he is a man of great vision. So he's trying to buy a huge plot of land and build a complex on it. And it seems that it's just too big of a fish for him to swallow. And he gets into chovot, right? Debts. And in 1974, he's more or less out of business. He retains some money, but he's out. He understands that he cannot continue. And because of all of the sorrows that he has, he falls ill, and he went to the hospital. While hospitalized, two things happened. One is that he decided he doesn't want to make money anymore, because for whom does he work? So he just would keep whatever he has, and he decides that he would go to learn psychology, which is at the age of 70, at the age of 80, he becomes a student in California University, California State University of Northridge. That's the formal name. And so again, I think it's amazing. Another thing that happens to him while he's in hospital, you remember his niece and her husband. So they have a son named Ohad Yonai. Ohad Yonai, completely secular already, is a little famous in some societies because he was a writer. And while he lived in LA, near Hollywood, he wrote the script, or the basis of the script, for the holy sefer called Top Gun. Okay, so you're familiar with him. So that's the man. So you understand he is not writing Hasidic Torah. And he is the great nephew, right? He's the great nephew of George Nagel, Rabbi Yexhezkel Taub. And now he's in LA, so he goes to visit his great uncle, and the great uncle is in the hospital. And they reconnect, they re-establish the connection that was almost completely lost. However, George Nagel is still George Nagel, completely clean-shaven, and no yarmulke, no nothing. He goes to learn psychology in the age of 80. And then something amazing happens. He lives in the dorms of the university because, why not? And he becomes the Rebbe of the students because he's 80 years old. He went through all of these turbulences in his life, and they come to him for guidance. And he's learning psychology. He is volunteering in a place for people with mental illness that they are trying to reconnect into society. He develops a Torah, which he calls now, of course, a psychological approach. He says people are like the stars need gravitation to gravitate towards each other and not to drift away in space. So people need to connect to each other in order to gravitate. Now, this is from a lonely man who severed every connection to his past. Of course, what I would say now is speculation, but for me, it's clear that he went to learn psychology not only in order to heal other people's, but because maybe he hoped to find a remedy for his torn soul at the age of 80. He even wrote a book, a sefer, named Paradise Cove, about his experiences as a psychologist in this, as I said, in this place. And he was interviewed when he published the book. That's the interview that I mentioned. So he's being interviewed in 1977. The interview is for free. You can find it on the internet if you want. You can send it, a link, half an hour, in like all television. They see it and they speak, and no one screams at each other. It's amazing to see it. Speak very politely. And it's not trying to be fast or upbeat. It's different. It's beautiful to see. And he speaks, he finishes his bachelor degree and practical masters in psychology. I'm not sure what does exactly that mean. It seems that it's not completely masters, but like a practical in order to be able to work as a psychologist. In the age of 80, what did he hope to achieve? It's not clear, for me at least. And then this Ohad guy convinces him that he must come and visit Kfar Hasidim to see what happened, what he established. And at 1981, so he left at 1938, and now it's 1981, 42 years. He didn't want to, he's being really dragged to Kfar Hasidim, and he said, and Ohad says to him, just come, pay a visit, see what happened, and then return to LA, nothing would happen. Unknown to him, Ohad was arranging in the village, in the Kfar Hasidim, that would be a great reception, big reception, and in a hall. And when he comes in, they tell him, just come for a second here. And again, he looks as George Nagel. There is no Yexhezkel Taub for the last 40 years. He comes into the hall, and suddenly the hall is filled with all of these people, the residents of Kfar Hasidim, those that wanted to see him. And they sit him on the head of the table, like a Rebbe in a tish. And he doesn't know, he's out of business for the last 40 years. And he sits there, and he doesn't know what to say or what to do. And then the first man sitting next to him says to him, Rebbe, do you remember me? And he looks at him and says, you are Chaimke? He was a young boy. You are Chaimke? He says, yes, I'm Chaimke. And I wanted to thank you. He says, to thank me? You all saw me as a thief, and I escaped, and I never came back. I never gave you the money. And Chaim says, but you do not understand. Without you, we will all be destroyed in Europe. You created Kfar Hasidim. You created our salvation. You are responsible for every man sitting here. Please come back. And then they begin one after the other. Each one saying, thank you for saving my wife and the life of my family, and please come back. the whole room. They re-aged it, obviously. And they say he was crying. The age of, you can just imagine that, in the age of 80, 86. In the age of 86, after he was sure for 40 years that no one wants to see him, that he's hated, that he destroyed the life of his Hasidim. They said, no, you saved our life. He goes back to LA, he closed whatever business that he has there. He returns to Kfar Hasidim. He regrow his beard. He re-put a yarmulke. And he gives, for a few years, he gave a private shul. He didn't want to go back. In one account, they said that they gave him the Mizrach in the shul. I think it is wrong. And the other account says explicitly he was not given because some of the people in Kfar Hasidim still couldn't stand him. All the haters died slowly. So he didn't want to make fuss. He didn't want to go to the shul. I think that's the right version. He stayed in his home. People came in, and he came back. 40 years after leaving everything, abandoning everything. He came back. He became a sort of a Rebbe. So people would come for bracha, for guidance, for help. And he was now a psychologist. He could help them. In 1986, at the age of 90, he passed away. He was buried in Kfar Hasidim. On his tombstone, I would read you the English translation. Here lies Grand Rebbe Yחזקאל Taub, the Rebbe of Yabloner, son of Grand Rebbe Ya'akov Taub. Last sign of the dynasty that began with Grand Rebbe Yחזקאל of Kuzmir, disciple of the Chozeh Lublin. He led his Hasidim up to Eretz Israel, where he redeemed the lands of Harjab, Haryech, and Shechabrek, founder of Nachalat Ya'akov, later known as Kfar Hasidim. And beneath that, that is on the standing stone, on the lying stone, it's written, Be'ahavat chinam tibane artzeinu. We free love our land. That's a sentence that he was used to say. So, as I said, is not your typical rabbi story, right? It's a story of a compromised Rebbe, of a fallen Rebbe. But it's a story of the Jewish people of the 20th century, of difficulties, of failures, of tragedy, but also of unwavering hope and attempts at redemption and at salvation. And I think as the introductory shiur to our series, I thought that he is someone that is worth probing into. So thank you so much for coming, and Be'ezrat Hashem will continue next week.
Very good.